which stated another way could be an increase in the intensity of energy usage, is largely due to conservation and demand-side management and customer efficiency measures. There has been a tremendous increase in the numbers of those programs over the last 5 to 10 years. Mr. Sandoval is the expert on that. I am not, but I do know that they've had a great impact. It is also my belief, but I don't have hard evidence at hand, that it is unlikely that the decrease is due to exporting inefficient, highly energy-intensive industries that may have formerly been operating in the United States and then would move elsewhere. My sense is that it is more likely that labor-intensive industries would have been exported from the United States. It also seems to me that an inefficient energy industry, in order to move, would incur a substantial amount of costs in so doing, and would be unlikely to replicate that same inefficiency in constructing a new facility at another location. And indeed, the cost of relocation in the new facility and the general translocation cost, strike me, is probably less than it would take to upgrade the facility domestically in order to achieve energy efficiency.
Thank you. Our next fax is from Pemex in Tabasco, and I would like Mr. Sandoval to respond to this question. Is there a feasibility in Mexico for the use of wind-based energy?
I'm not, I have to begin by saying I'm not an expert in the wind industry in Mexico, but clearly there are opportunities in situations where you have wind availability. One of the first things to do before embarking on the construction of a wind project is to conduct measurements of the actual availability of wind in a given region or in a given zone. You want to do a feasibility study to identify the amount of wind which reflects the amount of power that can be generated, and then the proximity of that generation site to your transmission or distribution grid.
If I might add, the proximity element is very important because wind generation is not one of the most competitive generation sources. In the United States, it is tax subsidized. There's a 1.5 kilowatt tax credit, per kilowatt hour tax credit in the United States for wind generation. In other countries, I don't know whether there will or will not be any kinds of subsidies, but there are only few geographic areas that would have the kinds of wind capability that Mr. Sandoval has talked about. And if those areas are remote from the transmission grid, and one would have to construct a lengthy transmission line simply to get the generation from the wind turbine to the transmission grid, then that in and of itself may make wind uneconomic.
Thank you. We're now going to move to live telephone calls, and our first is from Comisión Federal de Electricidad, Auditorio Atoyac. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Don't you think that if you open up the distribution network or the grid of the enterprises in the United States, perhaps could cancel out or eliminate the conservation or the energy saving on the part of consumers, because if they would lose clients because some of them will just go for other alternatives, and then the users will no longer want to choose a particular company, and then they would have to lose the savings. They would lose out customers and savings, energy saving.
This is an excellent question. This is at the heart of the issue underlying deregulation and the future of demand-side management programs. Arguments range from will there be an energy conservation program under deregulation, and if so, who will pay for it? do demand-side management programs offer services that are of benefit to industrial customers? And again, in that case, who will pay for it? Will it be all of the ratepayers, or will it be the site that is receiving the benefits? That is the answer to that question is something we are all trying to understand.
Do you have any additional comments about that?
Mr. Sandoval is absolutely correct. It's right at the heart of the debate in California, for example, in restructuring. And California has had one of the most aggressive demand-side management and customer energy efficiency programs in the United States. In fact, the two utilities who have spent the most on customer energy efficiency in the entire United States are both located in California, Pacific Gas and Electric Company in Southern California, Edison, both of whom have dramatically cut back on the amount of money they plan to spend on DSM programs because of their apprehensions about whether they would be fully able to recover those costs in a restructured environment. The fact of the matter is that many of these programs do entail upfront costs, and then the benefits are recovered over a period of years. And so there is a question of whether, if a customer has a choice in energy suppliers, is it going to be willing to pay one utility some costs and see those benefits over time, or will it buy its energy supply from another utility where it doesn't see that cost? Oftentimes businesses will have a shorter planning horizon than will utilities, and so if the recovery period for the upfront investment may be 7 or 8 years, many businesses don't have 7 or 8 year business plans. They have 5-year business plans and 1-year budgets, and so their performance is measured on a much shorter period. So they may be disinclined to incur large costs early on.
Very well. Our next call is from Unión Industrial Paraguaya in Asunción. Go ahead, please.
Sí, buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes. The question is the following. What is the proportion, the percentage of energy saving do you obtain when you have the daylight savings time? How much do you really save by moving the clock? Hello?
Yes. The question of daylight savings time and its impact on energy. Go ahead.
Energy efficiency.
Yes.
Right. I don't have a real clear number on that, but looking at the time of use rate structures under which many utilities operate, and under which many large industrial utilities operate, if you look at shifting the time of use by an hour during the daylight savings scenario, that 1 hour shift may represent maybe 5 to 10% of an energy use during an off-peak period. Mm-hmm. The on-peak period still stays pretty much where it is during the central part of the day when most business is conducted and manufacturing processes occur. I think there is, like I say, maybe 10% benefit.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is from Universidad Tecnológica de Panamá. Go ahead, please.
Morning. The reduction in the use of energy in the United States versus the greater use in the developing countries, is it due to non-transference of technology, or do you think it's because of the installation of the polluting companies and energy-intensive companies to the developing countries?
I believe that would be for Mr. Oglesby.
I think the reason that there is a larger increase, a rate of increase in demand for electricity in developing countries as compared to the United States, which I think underlies your question, is not due to either of the two factors that you've mentioned. I think it is more likely due to the fact that these other countries simply have rapidly expanding economies and are seeing that the forecasted demand for electricity is growing at a higher rate than that in the United States. And the United States industrialized economy is a very mature economy, and so the forecast in increase of electrical demand over the next 5 or 10 years is considerably less than 2% a year. In many of the more developing countries in Latin America and the Pacific Rim, that rate of increase in demand is far higher than 2%. And I think that's based on forecast, because these countries want to expand their economies and they want to encourage efficient industries that will improve the quality of life in their countries, and they're finding that they'll need a good deal of electricity in order to do that.
Thank you. Our next question is from CFA, Museo Tecnológico. Go ahead, please.
Will you please tell us what kind of programs you are developing for homes, for housing, because unfortunately most of it is developed for industries, but you forget about homes and housing, because those are a very important users of energy. And what about microwaves and motor engines for the television sets and for washers and dryers? And what are you going to do for housing? What kinds of programs do you have for private and residential, the residential sector?
Mr. Sandoval?
Okay. Actually, many of utilities in California, I know with San Diego Gas and Electric, a lot of our programs were started for residential customers. One of the main reasons is because of the political power in the state of residential customers, and their demand for lower energy costs and more efficient equipment. As a result of the utility programs, I can give you some examples that have allowed for dramatic energy savings in the residential sector. The energy efficient refrigerator program comes to mind. This was a national program that sought to raise the level of efficiency in residential refrigerators by over 30% compared to, I believe it was 1991 energy standards. The standards are based on the Department of Energy efficiency standards, which have been established or adopted by many states as the minimum efficiency level that refrigerators must meet to be sold in a home. The DOE, the Department of Energy, also was the basis for residential construction efficiency standards. Utilities will pay incentives to residential customers and construction developers above that minimum efficiency level.
Thank you. Our next call is from KTV in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Go ahead, please.
Hola.
Hola.
Buenos días.
The question is, do you have some type of information regarding the impact of the energy conservation in small enterprises in the United States? Also, if the government of the United States supports them, those kinds of projects, and how can we contact you? This is a question that we are sending you from the small enterprises companies in Rio de Janeiro.
Okay.
Small enterprise companies are one of the groups that utilities have sought to strengthen their services to and strengthen their alliances with. Some of the other groups, as I mentioned, would be the residential sector and then the medium and large size industrial and commercial markets. With the mid-size commercial market, utilities have set up programs. They're basically light energy audit programs whereby utilities, in conjunction with universities, have pursued energy efficient audits for these customers. Basically, small commercial customers do not have the resources to conduct a full, detailed energy audit of their facility. That being the case, utilities can play a role and have played a role in identifying energy-saving opportunities providing financing and financial incentives for these mid to small size commercial customers to purchase and install energy efficient equipment through which those customers can lower their operating costs, improve their productivity, and save money on their energy bill.
Thank you. Our next call is from Universidad Iberoamericana in Tijuana, California, Baja California. Go ahead, please.
To what extent are economic interests and political interests in the way of the development and utilization of electric energy given vis-a-vis the new energy resources, or sources rather?
There are both political and economic concerns that affect the development of new resources. Certainly there are strong political and other interests that are opposed to the further development of nuclear power. That comes easily to mind. A variety of environmental interests are opposed to further development of hydroelectricity, and some of the renewable resources are increasingly being seen as not quite as environmentally benign as originally thought. Certainly economic forces, if they're allowed to have a free hand, will probably dictate the type of generation that's developed, because logically, depending on the particular need, whether it's a baseload need or a load following need or a peaking need, then the overall cost of that generation will dictate how it's going to be built. It is certainly true that in the United States there has not been a complete rule of economic principles. Many decisions are made for political reasons and because of a variety of interest group pressures and a need to balance perhaps the long-term interests of society against the short-term economic interests. For example, integrated resource planning. One of the questions raised in California with its restructuring is whether there is a future for integrated resource planning. Will generating companies or suppliers, will they make their decisions for what to build and what to buy based upon short-term balance of benefits and costs at the harm of a longer-term benefit that might have greater societal benefit?
These are very, very good questions, and we want to answer as many as possible. Our next call is from CFA in Guadalajara, Jalisco. Go ahead, please.
Bueno.
Yes, go ahead.
Bueno. Sí, ¿de dónde llaman? Bueno.
Hello?
Hablo de
Yes.
Guadalajara, Jalisco, de la división Jalisco.
I'm calling from Jalisco, from the Federal Electricity Commission. What are the perspectives for the future in order to use hydrogen as energy source? And how is the energy administration in Mexico, and what would you improve? That's the question.
I might ask Mr. Sandoval to take a stab at that one. So the question has to do with the situation of hydroelectric power in Mexico and what kinds of incentives might be provided.
Again, I'm not an expert in the hydroelectric industry in Mexico, but I am aware of technologies that are on the horizon that offer opportunities for both distributed and centralized generation within the hydroelectric arena. An example is inline turbine generators in water distribution and transmission systems. This technology is basically a throttling device that resides within the transmission pipeline for water, and it throttles the flow of water to meet the needs of the recipients of that water. In doing so, it also generates electricity. That is one form of inline hydroelectric generation in existing water distribution systems. Again, to take a look at the hydroelectric industry in Mexico and the potential for generation would require a site, a feasibility assessment, and a comparison of the costs, the present value of the benefits and costs to construct that hydroelectric plant versus the competing alternatives, such as combined cycle gas turbine, steam turbine systems, and any number of alternatives. Demand-side management, or energy conservation, is essentially the provision of those present value benefits that are avoided by not having to invest in that capital-intensive sort of project.
Very good. Thank you. Our next call is from Cimentos Apasco in Tabasco, and please go ahead with your question.
Gracias. Ingeniero Jorge de Casper, de Planta Macuspana, director de operaciones. La pregunta es la siguiente.
The question is the following.
¿Existen experiencias con la generación
Do you have any experience with generation of electricity with alternative fossil fuels, with toxic waste or community wastes? Is that something that has been done?
The answer is yes, to some extent. California has developed quite a large segment of its generation through the use of alternative and renewable fuels. And in California, there are a large number of smaller generators that burn waste products, agricultural waste, wood waste. There are also generators that burn methane from decomposing material, known perhaps not elegantly as garbage burners. So there is certainly the technology exists. There have been some problems with technology that burns recycled material. There again run into problems with the economics of the production process. This material is not as cheap as one might think in California, and the cost of producing electricity from some of these generators has actually been higher than the cost of alternatives. So certain judgments have to be made by government as to whether there is sufficient long-term societal benefit associated with disposing of waste products in this fashion. And I don't know that California or the United States has fully rationalized those competing concerns. So I think internationally, I think the potential exists. Again, if it's driven by pure economics, it's more likely to be a more conventional fossil fuel power plant.
Mr. Sandoval, do you have anything to add?
Yes, I would just briefly add that there are many incineration and combustion technologies on the horizon that are being designed to deal with exactly this sort of a problem. What do we do with waste? There's various kinds of hazardous materials, medical waste, water treatment waste, etc. The economic evaluation of these kinds of technologies has to bring in more than just the energy savings and costs. You must also bring in landfill savings, trucking to off-site disposal savings, benefits and costs, labor increase or decrease as a result of implementing these technologies. And so what I'm saying is, in the economic evaluation of these competitive alternatives, you must look at the other benefits and costs beyond energy.
Thank you all for your excellent questions, but we are now running out of time for this portion of the program. Thank you for your participation. We hope that you have enjoyed this video conference and that it has addressed at least some of the issues of importance to you. We want to thank our expert presenters and panelists for their providing expertise and insights regarding today's topic. You have helped us to understand much better the strategic importance of energy resource management locally, regionally, within our hemisphere, and globally. We must begin these efforts in our communities now so that we can assure our future generations a better quality of life. On behalf of the International Training Center of San Diego State University, I wish all of you the very best. Again, we remind those of you who have been participating in our 1994-95 Telecommunications for Education and Professional Development series of an important date change. The next program in this series, entitled Multimedia Training Strategies, Design, and Evaluation, will be transmitted a few days later than originally scheduled, on Wednesday, April 26. This date change has been made in order to accommodate the many sites which were going to be unable to participate on the originally scheduled date. For additional information on International Training Center programs, you may consult your print package, where you will find the dates and specific topics of our 3 series. On behalf of all of us who collaborate with the International Training Center, I thank you for your participation and interest in today's program. Thank you very much, and see you soon.